Hi everybody, it's Katrina with the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I'm back now, and I'm going to show you guys how to add a second row of brick stitch to this brick stitch on a frame project. But the whole point of this lesson is to learn how to do an increase when using smaller beads. Now, the same principle I'm going to teach you would apply to whether this was a flat piece of brick stitch beadwork or whether it is on a bead or on a frame, working in a round. As you work outwards from the center, or your brick stitch would naturally increase. Say I came back and I did a second row of 8/0s on this particular project. I would need to go ahead and do at least one increase to account for the fact that the beadwork is moving outward and having to fill up a larger space as I work around. When we're working with 11/0s, we're going to have to do several increases in order to get these beads to fill up the space and also to fill up a space occupied by larger beads beneath it. So we're going to have several increases we will have to work through along this next row in order to get everything to come out looking really pretty like this, with no noticeable gaps and no huge, noticeable gaps here, and keep everything nice and even on the plane of our hoop right here. So when you begin working on the second row, once again we go back to just normal traditional brick stitch, because now we're going to be working with our thread bridges here on the outside edge of our first row. Because it's brick stitch and we're doing a new row, we're going to have to pick up 2 beads. So we'll go ahead and pick those up and drop them down. So the first place we're going to do an increase is right here at the beginning of the row. Normally, in traditional brick stitch, if these beads were the same size, I would skip this first thread bridge and scoot over to here and pass my needle under. But because my beads are smaller and I know I'm going to have to do several increases, I'm going to start right at the beginning and do an increase. So I'm going to pass under that first thread bridge. My thread is exiting from this bead. I'm going under the bridge between this bead and the very next bead. And I'm working to the left, because basically I'm left-handed and I usually sew to the left. All right, so now that we've passed under the thread bridge, we got to go up through that second bead, just like we always do in traditional brick stitch. Let's get into position. And then, because I like to straighten my first bead at the start of the project, I'm going to come right back down through the first bead of this new row, my 11/0. And I'm going to come right back up through the second bead again to add the thread bridge at the bottom and to get into position to continue stitching and adding new beads. And so now you can see those 2 little beads sit really pretty beside each other. So now we're ready for single bead at a time brick stitch. And here's the tricky part. So the easiest way to determine which thread bridge you need to pass your needle under is to drop the bead down, and it is to drag it over just like this and see where it falls. So you can see that this bead right here is falling closest to this thread bridge right here. And it's this side of the bead I'm concerning myself with, because that's the side I'm going to pass my needle back up through to step up. So I'm going to come under that next thread bridge. And then I'm just going to step right up through my new bead. And snug my bead right into position beside the previous bead. So now I'm ready for my next, pick up my next bead. And eventually you will be able to get to where you're able to tell whether you should skip over to the next thread bridge or whether you should use the same thread bridge that you just used. But we're going to go ahead and just use this method for a few minutes till we get the hang of it. We're going to take our bead, we're going to lay it over just like this. We're going to determine if we can use the previous thread bridge or if we can use the next one. So in this instance, I'm perfectly fine using this next thread bridge. So I'm just going to pass under that thread bridge. Step up into my new bead. Pull it into position, nice and firm, but not over pull. Then pick up my next bead. Now I can, because I've done this so many times, this is one of my favorite stitches, one of my favorite projects is to work on a frame. I automatically know that if I skip over to this next thread bridge, I am going to have a huge gap. So just by looking, I can tell that I need to come under this, the previous thread bridge one more time. So I'm going under the same thread bridge that I did for the last bead before I step up into this new bead. And I promise you, you will get the hang of this. And even as I was working this one, there are several times that I had to put my bead on, drop it down, and make sure of where I wanted to position my new bead. It's a little bit time consuming, but if you want your work to come out looking really pretty and professional, it's worth it to take that time. So now I know I used that thread bridge twice. I'm just going to come under the next thread bridge. And add that bead. I'm going to pick up a bead. And say I make a mistake. Say I come all the way over here to the next thread bridge. Let me pull that in. It's not, you're not necessarily able to see it until I step back up, but that's going to put a pretty decent little gap in between those two beads right there, because this base thread is all the way over here. My other bead is sitting way over here. So say I've made the mistake. How do I get this out without making a nightmare of a mess? Well, here's the thread bridge I passed under. You can see it right there. All I have to do is poke my needle between those two beads at the bottom and right above the frame right there. You can see where I'm poking my needle through? And pull it all the way back through. And boom, I've got my thread out. If it becomes a tangled mess, take your needle off and then work. All right, so now I am going to go ahead and pass under that same thread bridge where I just added my previous bead. And then I'm going to step up. And I'm going to check to make sure that that bead didn't sit too tightly against the previous one, or I would have to take it off and then extend it outwards. So I'm just going to keep working in this manner, putting my beads on, checking which thread bridge I actually want to go under here. You could pull the thread towards the front like that, or you can pull it towards the back, but you want to kind of pull it straight down from the bead that you're working with to see where you want to dive under the thread bridge. So this guy is going to go under this thread bridge right here. And that is the easiest way that I have found to use a variety of beads with this technique and with adding, additional rows. So let's do a couple more. So now I know I can go under my next thread bridge. Step up. Pull that thread out like this so the beads pop nicely beside each other. And add my next bead. In every second or third bead on this particular pattern is going to require that you do an increase. And I only know this because I've already done one. Now see, I've added that last bead, and you can see that I have a little bit of a gap there. And I'm not going to be satisfied with that because like previous experiments with this stitch when I was brand new to beading, I probably would have left that bead in place. But I'm doing things much more differently these days, and I really like to have a professional look. Now you can see right here that before I can pass that thread into between the beads on the base, I am going to have to get this thread through the loop first because I actually came through that hoop on accident. And now I can tell that I can pass my needle between those two 8/0s above the frame to get that bead off. Then I'm going to come back through and go into the same thread bridge I used on the previous stitch. Try not to get frustrated. It is a process. But it makes for some really beautiful beadwork. Something else I want to mention really quick is, like, you do not have to use these super huge components. You can use really small ones. You can use different shaped ones besides circles. There is so much you can do with this stitch. It is so pretty, and it creates some really gorgeous beadwork. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working until I've gotten my little 11/0s all the way around this hoop, and I'm ready to join up the last bead to the first bead, and I'll come back and show you guys how to do that. So guys, as you work, you want to keep checking often to make sure you're staying on plane, and try to remember that if you pull your thread as you're finally putting this bead into final position, kind of pull it straight out like that, and that will line the beads up even more nicely and for a more professional look as you work. As you're working, if you happen to notice that you have a bead that is giving you a problem, if it's close to where you're working from here, you can just use the technique I showed you for passing between the 8/0s to take those beads off. But if it's several back, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and take your needle off of your thread and work by pulling the beads off that way. That way you don't wind up pulling all of your base beads here out of whack and shredding your thread and making it weak. All right, so here I am, and I've worked my way around. And now we're going to have to make another design decision when you get to the end here. So if you'll notice, I've got a relatively decent sized gap right here. If I were to try to fill that, I'm going for an even number of beads on the outside of this particular project. So what I have to do is I have to make up my mind whether or not to add 2 beads here. If I've got enough room, I've got 50 beads on. I'm going to pick up these 2 beads and I'm going to drop them down. And I'll show you guys why I decided to use an 8/0 here. If I drag this over like this, and I go to stitch these beads standing up, I'm going to have one bead that's probably going to poke out off of my plane right here. And so I changed my mind about all that, and I decided to use an 8/0 because I'm working on a project. If I was just working, I would have played around with it to see what's up. But I decided to put an 8/0 here and then make that the top center of my component to add like my earring finding or what have you there. So I'm going to use this 8/0. You can use whatever you want. I am going to come onto my next thread bridge right here. And I kind of got a little knot in my thread earlier. And then I'm going to go ahead and step up. Get my tail thread kind of out of the way there. Now I'm going to put that bead into position right beside the bead, the bead before it right here. So now I'm going to connect these 2 beads. So I am going to close the beadwork. I'm coming out of the top of my 8/0. I'm going to come down through the top to bottom of the very first bead from this round. And I'm going to pull nice and snug. Then I need to step up into the last bead, which in my case is this 8/0. And before I pull really tight, just like I did on the previous video, I'm going to pull this thread good and firm, and I'm going to hold on to it until I get all of this loose thread pulled up through, and then I'm going to let it all go at once. And so now I have this little bead sitting at the top from which I can use to add my earring findings. But before I do anything else, I'm going to pass back down through my first bead again, and I'm going to really tighten this bead up in here because you can see how that thread bridge is trying to pull loose right here. You see how it's loosening up already? So I'm going to go ahead And I am going to tighten that up. Pull hard on this one and hold it while I come back down. Then I'm going to step up one more time into my 8/0. And now I've really secured the bead on this side. I can do the same thing on this side with the second to the last bead. And just tighten that 8/0 in there really nice. And close any little bit of a gap that I might have. I'm going to pull hard on this thread here. And I'm going to hold it down while I pull the loose thread through. Now I'll pull straight out, nice and firm. So now I don't have any gaps, huge noticeable gaps. I'm positioned, I've closed my beadwork, and I'm positioned to start an additional row if that is what I wanted to do. At this point, I could either go ahead and add this little section of beads here for my earring finding, or I can come back through at the end and put that on. So what I'm going to do next is, that's it for this part of the next little short tutorial. I'm going to do one more that's going to show you guys how to sew down into the inside of the frame and how to work on adding some beads on the inside of your bead frame. All right, so that's it for now. If you'd like to see the next video, just stay tuned for it. It'll be up. I'll probably post all 3 of these on the same day. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Head over to the Alluring Bead Boutique and check out all my great and wonderful new blog posts over there. I've got loads and loads of beading tutorials, basic stitching, wire working basics, wire wrapping basics. Getting ready to probably go ahead and do either a pattern or a full project for this earring. Since I already have the pictures, I'll probably write it up over there. All right, guys, I want to thank you guys for being here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and have a great day.